Hello and welcome back to another app development video. So today we're going to look at the Bouncy Ball app that you're going to be making. And let me just say that this is not an app that you want to be spending like a week on. It's really just sort of a quick app to introduce the ball element, introduce the fling event, and hopefully something that you can have a little fun with and sort of mess around with. So what the app involves is pretty simple. It involves a ball, it involves two barriers, and you are able to throw the ball. And when the ball hits the different walls of the app or it hits the different barriers, different effects happen. So yours doesn't have to look exactly like mine. You're going to have different things happen when the ball interacts with the app. So when it hits the top edge, you're going to have one thing happen. When it hits the right edge, you're going to have something else happen. When it hits the bottom edge, you'll have a third thing happen. When it hits the left edge, you'll have a fourth thing happen. And then also different events when it hits either barrier. Now, what those events are completely up to you. You can have the ball get faster. You can have the ball get slower. You can have it change color. You can have the background change color. Anything, it's really up to you. You know, the app has all these different properties, and we've been altering those properties in our different apps. So any properties you want to alter, it's up to you. As long as something different is happening when it hits the four walls and the two objects. The other thing that's going to need to happen is that when it hits one of these walls, I'm going to have it happen slowly, the wall has to move to a new spot. So that time it didn't move much, but it's randomly moving. So every time it hits the wall does have to move to a new location, and that just makes the app a little more unpredictable because the walls are bouncing around, the ball is bouncing around, and you just get these really sort of chaotic sequences where all sorts of different things are happening. So you can see that my ball gets bigger, it gets smaller, it changes color, sometimes it disappears, the background changes color. So these are all different things that you can do. And then when I click on the screen, it does reset it to sort of the starting value. So if it gets too crazy and out of hand, just clicking on the screen resets it. So that's what you're going to be doing is you're going to be building this. And again, have fun with it. Try to make it as crazy and as ridiculous as possible. As long as each wall does something different and the barriers do something different, that's all I'm looking for. All right. So let's talk about how we're going to set this up. And then you can kind of pick up with the lab document and use that to sort of guide yourself through the rest of it. So I'm going to switch over to a blank project. So give me a second to do that. So I'm going to start a new project, and I'm going to call this project, we'll call it Bouncy Ball. Seems like a good enough name. All right, so I'm going to click OK. I'm going to get my blank app here. Now, as far as what this app involves, it's pretty simple. All right, if you go to drawing and animation, we're going to drag in a canvas. All right, and that canvas is going to set to fill parent on the height and fill parent on the width. So it's basically just taking up the entire screen. We're going to add two image sprites. All right, these are going to be our walls. The walls are just image sprites. Now, the wall picture is attached with the lab, but don't forget that you're going to have to upload that picture. So you can go to upload file, choose file. It's called wall.gif. So I'm going to hit open or GIF, click OK. And then I'm just going to set both of these pictures on my image sprite. So I've got image sprite 1 and picture 2. I'm going to set them to wall.gif. So I'll click OK. Click OK on this one as well. So now I've got my two walls, and you can position them wherever you want because they're going to move anyways. So those are just starting positions. And then the new thing that we're going to be adding is the ball element. all right, which is kind of the whole point of this app. So I'm going to drag in a ball, and there's a couple properties that we're going to change. All right, one is I'm going to make the radius 15 just so that it's a little bigger. You can actually have the radius be whatever you want. So if you want a smaller ball, you can set the radius to 5. If you want a larger ball, you can set the radius to 20. I'm just going to set it to 15. I feel like that's a pretty decent size. And then, of course, your program can change it from there. And then the other thing we're going to change is the interval. So there's something that I don't like about MIT App Inventor, and it's this property that they call speed, because it's not really speed. I would be happier if they called this distance. All right, and let me explain why. So if you think about driving and you say, oh, what speed are you driving? All right, there's two things that people give you. They say, oh, I'm traveling 60 miles per hour. So they're giving you a distance, 60 miles, and they're giving you a time every 1 hour. All right. When we're trying to set how quickly we want the ball to move, it's actually a combination of this property, which I think should be called distance, and this property, which interval is fine. You could also consider that as time. But let's pretend that I change this to 10. All right. What that would mean is that my ball is moving 10 pixels every 100 milliseconds. So the speed is actually a factor of the distance, even though they call it speed. I don't like that they call it speed, and the interval. All right. So if you have, if you're saying, oh, I'm traveling 50 pixels every 100 milliseconds, all right, that's going to look a certain speed to you. But if I change this to, oh, I'm traveling 50 pixels every 10 milliseconds, that's going to look a lot faster, even though I left this at 50. So again, I like to think of this as distance, the distance that's being traveled, and this is the time that it takes to travel that distance. Now, if this number is too high, your app is going to look really glitchy. So generally, I'm going to put this when we're doing like a ball and having something move around the screen, I'm going to put this to 10. I feel like 10 is a good number that it makes it look relatively smooth on the screen. Going lower to that, you're not really going to notice, but it's going to increase like the processing that the app has to do. So I'm going to leave this interval at 10. Well, I'm not going to leave it. I'm changing it to 10 so that it updates every 10 milliseconds. And then I'm going to change the speed here back to 0. Otherwise, when you load up the app, the ball is going to instantly start moving, and that's not what we're looking for here. So I'm going to put the interval at 10. I'm going to put the speed at 0. All right, and that's it as far as the designer view goes. All right, so there's not a whole lot going on with the designer view. So if we go over to the blocks view, all right, there's just a few things that I want to show you. All right, one is that if you click on the ball, it has this event when flung. All right, this is sort of when somebody takes their finger on the screen and flicks it. All right, so flick, flung, whatever. But we're going to grab this, and you can see that this has a lot of properties. All right, X and Y is where you first put your finger down on the phone. So that's recording where you first put your finger down. Speed is recording how quickly you flick it. So are you flicking it slow, or are you really sort of kind of giving it a quick flick? And then heading is the direction in which you flick it. So are you flicking it up? Are you flicking it to the right? Are you flicking it down? Which way are you flicking it? Xvel and Yvel are like vectors. It's giving you the X velocity and the Y velocity. We're not really going to use those, so you don't have to worry about them. But that's what they're indicating. All right, so we're going to use this to sort of set the properties of our ball and get it moving. All right, now as far as the headings go, if you look at the lab document, you're going to see this little picture here. So a heading of 0 degrees would be to the right, 90 degrees is straight up and down, 180 degrees is to the left, and 270 degrees is down. So it's kind of the 360 degrees that you would have in a circle. All right, so that's how that heading is being measured. It's going to be a number of degrees, and those degrees will head off in a certain direction. So if you ever want the heading to start off at some value, just realize that if you have it start at 90, it's going up, 270 down, 180 to the left, and 0 to the right. But we're going to let the user kind of set the heading by using this fling direction. So in our ball, we're going to go and we're going to say, all right, set the ball heading, all right, which is one of the dark green properties, to whatever direction the user flings their finger. All right, so my emulator just lost its connection. We'll start that up in a second. But we're going to take this heading and say, all right, whatever direction they flick their finger, make the ball move in that direction. And then in the same way, we're going to set the speed of the ball based on how fast somebody flicks their finger. Now, one thing that you're going to notice is if you're using an emulator, it can be difficult to get a good flick with a mouse or a trackpad. So what you can do, and again, this isn't necessary if you are actually working on a phone, but when you're working on the computer and using the emulator, it can be hard to get a good flick. So what you can do is you can sort of give it a little boost and say, all right, I'm going to measure the speed of the flick. That's what this speed is. It's measuring the speed of the flick. But since it's hard to get a high speed with your mouse, you can give it a little boost and say, oh, whatever it was, let me multiply that by 1.5 or something, or let me multiply it by 2 or 3 or 4. And the larger the number, the bigger the boost that you're going to give. But this can just make it so that it increases the speed just a little bit. All right, so I'm going to pause the video for a second and start my emulator back up. And then once it's up, I'll kind of demo what we just did. All right, so I've got my emulator here. I've got my ball. I've got my walls. So when I click and then kind of drag my mouse, that's how I do a fling on the computer, you're going to see that I can move it. All right, and right now it's just getting stuck on the walls. It's not bouncing off the walls. We'll take care of that in a second. But basically, I can fling it. And again, if I wanted to be able to fling it faster, I could either try to use my mouse faster, or I could, boost this factor and say, oh, like let's multiply my speed by 3. And then it's pretty easy to flick it really fast. The downside is then it's hard to flick it slow because you're multiplying it by a larger factor. So again, you can play with this until you get something that you like. But with the emulator, it's sometimes helpful to give that speed a little boost since it's hard to get a good flick with your mouse. Now, the next thing we're going to do is get it so that it's bouncing off the walls. So again, in the ball menu, you're going to see when edge reached. All right, so this event detects when the ball reaches the edge of the screen. And you'll see that it has this one little property here. This property, this get edge, lets you know which side of the screen you've hit. And this is what you're going to be using to sort of figure out which of the different effects you want to have happen. But this is what tells you sort of which edge you've hit. And again, if you look in the lab document, it'll tell you like edge 1 is the top of the screen, edge -1 is the bottom of the screen, edge 3 is the right of the screen, edge -3 is the left of the screen. So you'll be writing code that's like, if edge equals 1, have this happen. If edge equals -1, have this happen. If edge equals 3, and so on and so forth. These edges have numbers, and this block here, this variable, will tell you which number you've hit when the ball bounces off an edge. Now, as far as getting it to bounce, MIT App Inventor actually has code that handles the edge bounce for you. So there's this purple block that says call bounce edge, right? And for it to work, it needs to know what edge you're hitting. So I'm just going to hover over edge here, plug this in, And then that's going to allow it to sort of bounce off the edges. And you'll see that right now the ball now is bouncing off all the edges. Notice it is going through the walls. Getting it to bounce off the walls is something that you're going to do during the lab, but it's at least now bouncing off the walls. And if I try to do this right, I can probably flick it while it's moving, but maybe I'm not good enough to do that. I should, in theory, be able to do it, but I'm not very good at this with my mouse, and now I'm just embarrassing myself. So I'll stop here. But this is where sort of the lab picks off. You're going to, first things first, you're going to put in the pause button. That way you don't have to look like a fool trying to flick it while it's still moving. So that's sort of the first step, is implementing the pause feature, which is just going to be when you click on the canvas, you're going to make the ball stop. Then you'll go through like getting it so that it actually bounces off the walls. And then you'll get it so that different things happen when it hits the different edges and the different walls and everything else. So again, this shouldn't take like 3 classes, maybe a class and a half, maybe 2 classes, but have some fun with it, you know, try to have it do some crazy stuff. And then after you're done with this, we're going to move on to an actual game that involves the ball property. So this sort of gets you used to the ball property. It gets you used to fling and see how some of these different things work. And then after this, we'll go into an actual lab where we're building a game that uses some of these properties. So again, sort of the main thing that I just think is a little weird is that when you're dealing with speed, just realize that what they call speed is really distance. And the speed that you see on the screen is the combination of this distance and the time it takes to travel that distance. Other than that, it should be pretty straightforward. Obviously, if you have any questions, give me a holler and we will go from there. All right, have a great day.